right. Good evening. This is Vegan Synergy Meditation number 12. I'm Dharmendra Gordon. And I'm going to start this by sharing an email I sent out to everybody in the Vegan Synergy Meditation meeting group today, inviting them to this meeting this evening. Greetings, fellow Synergy workers. Up to now, we have been offering our personal experience and/or our experience of the collective as the grounds for exploring our shadows, our genius, and our higher selves. This week, we are going to kick it up a notch by starting to work intentionally with the genetic life codes in the universal sense. So starting with the first code, which is traditionally called the creative, whose spectrum of consciousness associated with it is entropy, freshness, and beauty, and which is all about being an inspirational role model. We're going to open up and explore this code's themes in relation to empowering our personal life, enriching our experience in the collective realm, and expanding our consciousness through becoming aware of its function as a universal archetype in the totality of being. And each week following, we will follow a similar format as we travel through all 64 life codes. So next week, we will open up and explore the second life code, the next week, the third life code, and so on it goes. Also, as an added invitation to watch your dreams, I will also include the associated animal totems related to the weekly life code theme. Entropy is the firefly, which is a shadow. Freshness, which is the genius, is the bull. And beauty, which is the higher self, is the cockerel. And if you don't know what that is, it's a young rooster. And just so everybody knows, shadow is always associated with an insect or a fish. Genius is always an animal, mammal, and the higher self is always a bird. And you can obviously figure out the metaphorical relationships supporting that. So not only will we be exploring the life code themes intentionally, consciously, but also in our dreams through the animal totems. Just by exploring the various themes in the spectrum of consciousness of each life code consciously, we are also simultaneously activating through resonance the animal totems of our dreaming bodies, as all of life is an interconnected web in us, through us, and as us. So if you haven't participated yet in a live meeting yet, this would be a good time to start. And there are several seasoned participants that will lend their support, experience, and guidance throughout the process. So I just wanted to share that was the email I sent out today for everybody. I'm guessing that because up until now I haven't added things to read, I just send out an invitation. People probably got in the habit of not reading, but now each week when I send it out, I'm going to also send out a little bit on what the life code will be for that week, what the shadow, the genius, higher self, and also the related animals. Because I highly want to stress that now that we're going to start opening it up in that way, we're going to become like scientific explorers now into our own life codes. And of course, we can always use, as Melissa and I were chatting before we started the meeting, just before we started recording the meeting, sharing about how interesting it is that this first life code is really kind of where the whole Vegan World 2026 is right now. Because as I was participating in the VCI, Vegan Collective Intelligence Steering Committee meeting earlier this week, it ended up with just being in a place of it's all brand new. Nothing from the past is going to work anymore. And we're in a place we've never been before. So we're just going to hang here and see how it opens up. And that's exactly what entropy is. That's exactly what the shadow of the first life code is, which is the creative. It's about starting a true creative process. It comes from a place of like an inner vacuum. It's just a place where there is nothing yet there, truly nothing yet there, but it's a totally open space in the sense that it's ready to receive something new, something fresh, something never expressed before in exactly quite that way. So I think it's just kind of fascinating that we've kind of taken like up to now, we kind of offer our experiences and find the shadows and our genius and all that. But it seems like everything's starting to coalesce, and everything we're doing and everything Vegan World 2026 is doing, and the fact that we're opening up the first life code, which is the creative, which seems to be exactly where it's all at, is all kind of coming together in the same place right now, which is kind of fascinating. So I think, so this is even better than I thought it was going to be in terms of the timing of bringing out the first life code, because we're kind of, so this will be our contribution of just from the essence, from the essence, from the fire from within, I guess you could say, to yes, Melissa, please.
And Dharmendra, this is the number 12 Vegan Synergy meeting, and we are 3. 1 plus 2 equals 3.
there you go. There's a synchronicity. I love those. I always like those little things. I used to do that all the time.
Past, present, future.
Right. And also affirming, receptive, and reconciling. The 3 forces of existence: movement, stillness, and endlessness. There's so many different ways you can say it. It's the Trinity. The Trinity is what creates everything.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah. So since we're here and since this is what's opening up, I'll go ahead and start this evening because we're starting a new chapter. We're kind of, like I said, kicking it up a notch and becoming active participants in creating creating the frequency. Now we're actually going to create the creative frequency here tonight, and it's perfect that it actually we are in 3 and it's a trinity, because that is where everything. When you read the beginning early on in the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu, but after he says that, anything that can be spoken about the Tao, is not the true Tao, because the Tao can't be spoken about. But after he says that, he says the 1 creates the 2 creates the 3, and then the 3 creates the 10,000 things. So you've got to have the Trinity to create because if it's just a positive and negative, they cancel each other out. So you have to have that third force that is like the essence of the relationship of what the 1 and the 2 are in when they come together. There has to be an expression of that too, and that becomes a third force, and that's what brings everything out into the world so that we can all participate in it. So entropy. It was interesting when I was thinking of entropy, because I got clear about the vacuum state and entropy being a state where there's no energy left to maintain the organization or the structure of any type of entity or system. So it literally collapses, implodes within itself, which is a good way of looking at entropy. It is an act, because it is creative, because it's yang, because it is active. There is something happening, but the way it's happening through entropy is an implosion, not an explosion. And an implosion is a very fascinating thing to think about, because well, if it happens to you yourself, you will literally go through a mystical death and rebirth. That is what a mystical death and rebirth is. It's an implosion into the inner depths of your deepest, darkest, most abysmal dimension of who you are, your deepest, darkest shadow, and you implode into it. You literally infold and collapse into it. But then you come out a white hole, which is a whole other story, which we'll get to as we go on this evening. So to me, that's kind of a direct snapshot of the most profound experience I've ever had of entropy, and I want to offer it to this meeting and to the Vegan World 2026 and to veganism as a whole throughout the world, because it is definitely I think where the whole movement is at right now, because people are starting to rise too, like Joaquin Phoenix, and he's a very famous guy. So obviously that's going to attract a lot of attention, and a lot of people are going to start becoming interested in it. And I think up until now, there hasn't been that kind of an opening. And so I think that's why the entropy is happening. It's like a great in-breath before the out-breath. It's like everything is disappearing from the outside and imploding and infolding into the inside. in preparation for, I think, what's coming, because that's all the signs. If you really pay attention to what's happening in the vegan world in relation to the rest of the world, it just seems like something is about to really open. And just mirroring it in the vegan world 2026, and what's happening there with, you know, it being at a place where nobody, it's just, we've got to hang in there because nobody has any idea where to go with how to open it up because it's brand new. And I'm not going to get into the genius aspect yet, which is freshness, but that's where I would want to go. So if anybody else would like to share their song about the entropy phenomenon, either through their own life or whatever they've been experiencing. I mean, obviously I threw in some of what I've been experiencing this week, but because it just, the timing is impeccable. It'll be interesting to see every week as we do another life code too, that it tracking the actual evolution and development of this whole process would be fascinating. Well, it will anyway, because it's all one. So Melissa, I'll go on mute.
Yeah, so today I actually literally walk out of my studio into the parking lot and I go, why is everything taking so long to happen? I've invested so much in everything and nothing's happening. Yeah.
I'm not entirely sure about my relationship to the idea of entropy as of late, but I know that among my I took a break from living in Seattle and I moved out of there because I felt like the city was really overwhelming and kind of just psychically draining. So I came home and I have a group of friends here, and it just happened that one of my really close friends came home at the same time. And he has kind of been on a downward spiral recently, just not knowing where he's going in life and abusing substances. And I feel like I've been watching him kind of breaking down. And it was like today I just got back from having a really long conversation with him. And it was like I was seeing kind of him coming through this other side of this breakdown experience of like, there was this old version of himself, or there's this old pattern that was kind of like decaying. And I feel like he had been fighting that really hard. And I feel like that's kind of what I'm seeing similar with myself is like just in the world. Like I feel like things are kind of falling apart. Like this college institution that he's upset with is kind of falling apart and not making sense anymore. And I really feel like I'm starting at like just like level ground. I'm lucky to not be underground, but I really feel like this last like week that I'm really starting from like ground zero. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, all of that sounds like a really good description, especially with your friend, but then also how you synchronized and resonated with it. That's really a good description. Downward spiral into, that's all entropy. That's how entropy behaves as it goes down into, you know, that process of kabooming. Something that occurred to me while you were speaking just now, and I don't know if it was what you were saying or what was passing through your aura or just the general nature of these meetings, but I was impressed with, and by impressed, I was literally pressed in by something, and a kind of insight, I guess you could say, into this whole phenomenon of Vegan World 2026 and what Sailesh Rao has created, and the emphasis on veganism and the whole process of turning the, you know, and the whole aim and the vision is, you know, of turning the world, or is at least half of it by 2026 to veganism, to really literally, you know, be the essential way to transform the planet so that not only we save life on Earth, but we also have a future worth living. Not just save life on Earth, but have a future worth living too. That's very important. But what I see is it's created this field in which, you know, a kind of entropy in which a creative meditativeness can unfold. And it's taken a while for this dream to start occurring, but I literally believe I witnessed this week the beginning of it starting to occur. Vegan World 2026 went through entropy this week. It literally came to a crashing halt with all this effort to try and organize and da 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 da, and the person who's had so much experience at it in years past and is so good at doing all that stuff just said, I give up. I have no idea what we're doing here. So we're just going to hang with it and we're going to see where it goes. And that's literally where it's at, you know. And the other person who's been really contributing to try and give a structure to it also just said some very beautiful things about it. It's about being. It's about bringing yourself to this and bringing that out. Not getting so much lost in how it's supposed to be and the rules and all these things, because that again is part of the old cycle. That's all a part of what's dying. I mean, I think this is a really good conversation to have right now, is to start to take a look at, we're kind of like a part of what is the leading cutting edge of humanity's evolution right now, because it's the part of humanity that gets it about what it's going to take to move forward. Because I'm sadly enough, I think a lot of humanity is just not going to get there or make it. Because if we start to see what's crumbling around us more and more quickly every day through so many different avenues, from you name it, the coronavirus to everything else we already know about, and throw that in on top of everything, and who knows what's coming in the next week and the next week and the next week. I mean, and more it's and I don't think people are, I think a lot of us still have some old school ideas about what it's going to take to get through this radical threshold as evolving beings. And we think it's going to be what it took in the old way to survive. I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think a lot of us are going to be thrown into some very wild and wilderness kind of resembling places, but it's not going to turn out like it did in the past when that happened to people, because I think a lot of us just need to be thrown out of the old way completely, because something new is coming through, and that's the only way it's going to come. And of course, that definitely introduces the subject of freshness and the fact that it's not fresh if it ain't new. And it's something I've been ever since I've been part of Vegan World 2026. It's something I've been hammering on since I've been part of Vegan World 2026. Is, well, it's great to talk about all these things. It's great to have intellectual concepts and talk about how it might turn out in the future. But unless we jump into it now and start feeling what it's like, these shadows that are coming up in the collective unconscious of humanity, and also the struggles that are coming up in us in Vegan World 2026, trying to evolve something, but literally doing it in the old way instead of waiting for the new way to come, like we were talking about, waiting for a new way to come through and move you. Because that's where the fresh, yes, Melissa, go ahead.
Yeah, it's so interesting what you're saying, Dharmendra, and now I'm really understanding like all these collisions you and I were talking about earlier that have been happening, because there have been certain individuals who wanted to create a framework or set rules, and it just didn't feel right. And so those of us who are kind of in this entropy stage of knowing something new is coming, but we don't know what it looks like yet, although you can kind of feel it. Like I wrote down some words like, instead of individual, it's collaboration. Instead of self, it's community. Instead of scarcity, it's abundance. Instead of violence, it's nonviolence. I mean, we could go on, you know. So I think for me, those are those feelings. I don't know what that looks like yet. What does community look like for the future? You know, what does collaboration look like? I don't really know. I mean, I feel, but I don't know. And so that I think, yeah, you nailed it totally. And if we keep hanging on to these old ways, they're just not going to work. Definitely not working anymore.
I really liked what you had to say about that. As all these old kind of paradigms are falling apart, it's gonna be more about being than anything, and that's what we can do now And that's probably the best thing we can do, is come together and just focus on being in the moment together with one another. Because I feel my brain kind of scrambling, trying to fit myself into the solution for the problems of the world, and then I have to keep reminding myself to come back to and stop time traveling into the future and the past to find out where I'm supposed to be in the present, and just focusing on just being. And I've noticed that that's what's brought me the most peace, is when I stop criticizing my actions and the actions of others through this lens of how we all ought to be doing things. I don't know, and just in recognizing that, trying to kind of raise my frequency and my like vibration, my vibrational relationship with the life around me, that in and of itself is a service to the universe. Like it's appreciated. Like I notice it, like just in being outside. Like I feel like when I'm present, the world appreciates me, and I can, like, the birds will like sing to me, and I appreciate that. It's like, but we only get that when we're really being with ourselves and with others, just being here.
Something very beautiful you just said there that I can't pass by in silence. But there's no format anymore. Obviously, we've all been trained in how to do shadow and genius and higher self work now. I don't really want to force it into anything. Although a lot of times I'll probably start with a shadow, because that's usually an easy place to start with, but not always necessarily so, depending on which life code we're working with. But you said something about entropy, which I don't even think you realize. The mind is always either in the past or the future. It's never in the present. That's where the shadows are. Entropy, when you're in your mind, there's no energy for anything, because you're not even in the present. That's entropy. The source of entropy is the mind. You nailed it when you said that. In this discussion about entropy, freshness, beauty, this sequence that we're working with, this life code this evening, the creative hexagram of the I Ching of our DNA, it was perfect, because then I just thought, oh, that makes total sense. I mean, and that's why it's so beautiful to do these meetings, because people will just stumble upon things, and you'll just start tuning into it, because we've been practicing for several months now, 4 months now, how to do this stuff. And each time we do it for a couple hours, it's like months of work and concentrated, because we're all hyper reflecting and building on each other's insights. It's not one of us alone. So the progress we make, that's why it's accelerated collective evolution. The progress we make in one meeting, even with a number of people, is so much quicker. And so even though we've only been doing this 4 months, it's like we have this attunement now to where it's almost become just natural and spontaneous to us. We speak about entropy, and then you find a way to express it when you don't even have to intentionally tune into it, but the mind it's always somewhere else. So there's never any energy in the now. That's entropy. That's what the mind does. It creates that entropic space. But the beauty of it is, with the first hexagram, that the creative, is that if you can, as you say, if we can just drop into being present with each other here and now, and the heart opens up and the trust opens up, something fresh can come through. And that freshness was in this moment that the insights now start to come as you notice how when we open the shadow, after a while, the insights just start pouring in more so than usual. You ever think about that? That's the lotus growing out of the mud. The shadow is the mud. If you don't, I mean, it's okay if you don't have any personal shadows, but if we don't offer our shadows, hi, Puppin, how are you? If we don't offer, I love Puppins, but if we don't have a place for the lotus to grow out of, then, so it's again, it's about being selfless, Melissa. It's about getting beyond your own personal, whether you got shadow work or not, and realizing that we live in a shadow world. And the minute we can address it, we'll start to find it within the very shadows is the genius and the higher self. It's all interlaced. That's how life works. It's all blended in there. So it's just a matter of shifting perception in a kind of multi-dimensionally skewed way, you know, if that makes sense. Like, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, and we really have to go into the mud to do that flowering. You know, I love that idea. And also, just going back to what Evan was saying, we're also trained to do this, go to school, go to college, get a degree, go get a job, make money, buy a house, get married, have kids, whatever, you know. And it's like, that's all falling apart too. So like this go and get a job, work shit is just like, doesn't make sense anymore. So what does make sense is, like you're saying, Evan, like go out into nature and just connect. So whatever I do also personally, like feeding the birds, hanging out with the squirrels, the chipmunks, the raccoons, whatever, the orca whales, that makes sense to me. That connecting with that greater community of life around us and reconnecting. It's a new relationship that we're coming into with nature, which is really powerful. And it has nothing to do with work. And it's weird because we have to still put food on our table, right? And have hopefully a roof over our head. So how do we do that? You know, by being rather than going out and getting.
You know, I really appreciate what you're saying, just because I just was having a conversation with my friend, and I was kind of I was kind of just griping about how I was like, man, I'm really upset that like the world is kind of telling me, or the abstract world around us is telling me that I need to be getting a job right now, and my mind is telling me the same thing too. I need to find work. My dad is a little bit concerned too, and when we were just walking along the river, and I was just picking up a stick, and I was saying, because like all we do or the way that we learn best and we grow best is through play. And I think that this new world is going to be one that's so playful, it will seem too good to be true, or it will be the shift that you have to make is one away from that suffering sun that you mentioned, Dharmendra, to the loving mother, and yeah, it's a strange shift to be making, to really to allow yourself to prioritize play in a world that's decaying and falling apart. So I'm trying to find some sort of work that I can do where I can be playful in it, and it does not demand my soul energy, or doesn't feed off of it, but then still have time to just play and be creative. Like today, I just was cutting up the bark that I found on the beach. I was cutting it up and realizing I could make displays using it that looked like a rugged mountain range, and I was just allowing myself to just play around, knowing that this does not have to be a career. I don't have to sell this on Etsy to justify me doing it right now. This is just something that's good for me to do. Yeah. Yeah.
Beautiful, Evan. Yeah, interesting. Really getting zipped with a lot of insights tonight. That's what happens when you get into entropy, man. You get the freshness that starts to come through, which is literally wants to come through your voice. It is a voice. That the creative is a voice. It's directly connected to the throat, by the way, in the body graph. But take a deep breath for a sec. There were several things I wanted to say, and they all just blew up. So right now, I'm just taking a deep breath. That never happens to me. I always manage to catch it. But that was fun. It's good. See, that's again proving the point of what's actually happening, is that we're constantly being thrown into this new space. And now I remember what I wanted to say. But one of the things that is we're learning here And I think now it's starting to line up and make sense, is that we're being offered this capacity to use our genius in a new way, and that new way is not I mean, I see that it would be nice if we could, and we kind of hope we can get to that future quickly, but I think the real courage it's going to take right now is to stay firmly rooted in this shadow world, and engage it fully. And our genius is, if we want that playfulness, why can't we be in touch with our higher self and be in that playfulness dimension while we're in the very midst of that shadow? What is stopping us from doing that? See, that's really the task we're facing. And it took me decades to get that one, because I always wanted to just escape and go into the nicer spaces and hang out with the nicer people and have the great conversations and not be bothered by the mess. But since I've become a vegan, and seen the suffering that's going on, and just the immensity of it, that becomes such a selfish thing, such a selfish, shadowy thing to do in a not good way, in a not good shadowy way, but not, in a very unconscious shadowy, in a way that just takes for granted so much without really offering anything back. That the fact that we have the life that we have, and a nice life we have, depends on so much support out there on so many levels. And unfortunately, a lot of it is built on suffering, or has been built on suffering, or was built up from suffering. So it feels to me like we all have karma to share in a collective sense by engaging the shadow, but in an artful, intelligent way. And the true genius is to call forth from within yourself, and be directly connected, invoke your own higher self, especially when you're in the shadow spaces. And they don't have to be heavy shadow spaces. It could just be a long, monotonous, boring, dull day that you got to do it in, which is most of the time what it is anyway. I don't know how many more of those we're going to have, though, given where the world's headed quickly. I mean, there may not be any more of those kind of days. It may be the real shadow stuff. But it's a perspective. We take this linear approach of moving through a shadow, and then heading in, and embracing that, and finding our genius in embracing it, and realizing that we're our own cure, we're the answer we've been looking for. And then we open to our higher self, to let that beauty, and to be touched by the beauty of something from the beyond. At least beyond in the sense that we're used to. It's not really beyond in the big sense, the big picture. A lot of what's out there is already beyond, and that's normal. But for us, it's beyond, because it's not real normal down here in the shadow world. So I think that's just something we're all being called to, as synergy workers, light workers, however you want to call it. It's like, who else is going to do it? Who else is going to do it? I mean, who else is going to, given the immense amount of suffering out there, and us wanting to take responsibility for relieving some of that suffering, there's only one way we can do it, and that is to go out there and be in it. But with the difference that we know that if we can get in touch with the magic of the entropy on the inside, and just get into that empty vacuum space, and quit going into every situation with so much judgment about, oh, it could be better this way, I'd rather be doing that. I mean, why do they get here? How come they're not like this? Why is the government so screwed up? Why is our world so, how did we, and all that crap. Instead of doing all that, why aren't we just present, and let the entropy hit us? Let that heavy, closed suffering, making you want to just collapse almost in nausea or whatever. But instead of resisting it, we just go, okay, whoosh, and it goes right through. And then something can come through. Something can come through that can become an action in relation to that. Yes.
I hear what you're saying, Dharmendra, but my impression is that brakes are being pressed that have nothing to do with my individual self. It's like the brake is on, and I'm in a holding pattern. And it doesn't really matter what I do, the brakes are on, And I find that, it's not necessarily the first time I've had that experience, where there is something else happening that is controlling the situation. And sometimes I know there's just period of waiting. It's like I just gotta wait it out. And that's the feeling I'm getting now. It's
Mhm.
like, it's beyond my control. So it's not even like passing through entropy or shadow into the gift. It's just there's a holding pattern right now that
Mhm.
I feel personally.
Mhm.
And I don't know if that's affecting just, some of us individually, like if there are different cycles for that, or whether that's just happening across the board and some of us are aware of it or not. I don't know.
Let me ask you a question. Keep your mic on. Let me ask you a question. I want to dialogue with you a little bit.
Yeah, yeah.
So what, I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying. I want you to, if you feel like it, go into with me, what type of place do I need to be in order to perceive this phenomena that's happening the way you're perceiving it? And is there any other position or place I can be in to perceive this phenomena that might yield a different perception?
I'm not sure I'm understanding the question.
Yeah, this is why I wanted to go into dialogue. It's a sacred geometry thing. It's the trajectory we're all headed in life. Each one of us has a unique trajectory. Then we have various shared trajectories of different degrees of collectivity. We also share all in the universal trajectory. Um, but that trajectory is also is a place. It's a place, but in a dynamic, not a static sense. It's a place. It's a place that you're stationed in relation to everything else that's moving rather than still. And that place that you're describing of a holding pattern, um, if I cut to the chase, what I would say is that your position in relation to the holding pattern is a result of the frequency that you are resonating at based on how you perceive that holding pattern. Because as I experience it, there is no, the stillness is so complete and so perfect that everything is always in movement, if that makes any sense. There's never any holding pattern. The only holding pattern there could possibly be would be an individually oriented one, because it just doesn't exist anywhere else. And that would mean there's an objective or an aim or a desire or a intention that is when it comes to the possibility of being in harmony with the times, there's a subtle sense of wanting a part of that to be special for oneself and not be contributing to the whole. And so then you get into a holding pattern, right? But I also understand and I differentiate from another aspect I pick up from what you're saying, is that we're in a holding pattern before the creation of something that's going to be quite monumental, that has to do, but that's a very collective thing that we're all engaged in. That's a big thing that we're all a part of. That there is, I mean, for me, when I get into places like that, that's when I do more movement than ever. That's when I intensify my meditativeness. I intensify my creativity. I call upon my higher self more and more to be with me at all moments, because it feels like the world could slip at any moment into a great big mud hole, in different areas right now. And it's like, I really want to make sure I really want to accelerate on the inside, because the outside is becoming much more a slippery slope.
Yeah.
And you can see it so much, and so another aspect of what I see with the holding pattern is it's wise to have a sense of stillness. Um, a different way of saying holding pattern, just so that your awareness can be somewhat expanded. Because if you go to stillness, your awareness will just expand naturally. There's nothing you need to do; it will expand. Just like mud settles in a still pond, after somebody stepped in it, the mud will eventually settle through the stillness. So it clarifies by itself, and you know. So yeah, there's a lot of aspects in what you're saying, and they all connect into the entropy thing. They all connect into the newness, that's something wanting to emerge, something wanting to come through from this vacuum state that we're all kind of being forced into. And I think it's probably going to intensify for the world out there. I think the leading edge of what we're a part of is we're probably going to move through it about as quick as any group can. But however long it takes is however long it takes. And I think slowly in the VCI, the Vegan Collective Intelligence Steering Committee of Vegan World 2026, they're starting to get that this may not, that we may be in a holding pattern for quite a while, may not just resolve itself the next meeting just because we think, oh, we'll just be in a holding pattern for a week and then it'll be done. There is no pattern anymore, really.
Yeah.
You know, it's more of a holding process.
Yeah, yeah, I
You
totally
know?
get that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, when you were talking, something was coming to me, but I lost it again, so it'll come back.
Okay.
Something kind of came to me is this idea of when you're reaching the boundaries of your own perception, you start to get this feeling of stagnation. Like as you've explored as much of your awareness as you start to reach the boundaries of your perception, yeah, you experience the stagnation, and you feel like things are starting to kind of fall apart because in this closed system, you're starting to run out of places to go, space to go, and I feel like it creates this feeling of like tension and like things are gonna stop all of a sudden, and then, but I think what happens from that is eventually like this pressure grows, and once there's this great expansion, now as your awareness grows, like I've noticed this with myself where like I had been doing work for myself for a very long time, and then when I finally opened up and started doing this work with Nolan and with Jamin and with you all, it was like this pressure had been released, and I had now started doing more work quicker than ever before. But if you had have asked me 2 years ago, I would have said I was like nearing the end. Like I just felt like I was running out of room. And so I feel like on a collective level, something similar is happening, where this old system is it's kind of like nearing the outer limits. It's like horizon, and it may potentially slow down or scramble, but I don't know. I feel a similar holding feeling. I don't know, like I'm in a holding room before moving on to the next room.
Yeah. And I just also want to add to that, because it came back to me, thank you, Evan, is that because we're all conditioned and we've been different people throughout our lives, like I'm a mother, I was a wife, I was an architect, you could go on, I'm a pilot, I'm a whatever, a scuba diver. We've all had these different identities that we've identified with, and along with those things we identified with came a lifestyle or a particular way of doing things, thinking, being, and blah, blah, blah. Now, and of course, Evan, I'm much older than you, so I've got a lot more, not just experience, but a lot more stories, I guess, in a way, just over time and kind of reinventing self over and over again and exploring and trying out different things. You get to, I don't know, I just feel like you've got to this place now where it's like, well, now what? Who am I? And what now? Sort of thing. And it really calls us, or calls me, to really look into my relationships, whether it's with myself or my family or my partner or the world around me, and kind of go, okay, now how do I relate? How am I going to be now? What am I going to be doing now? Sort of thing. Like I can go into my studio and make art, sure, but now it's kind of like, well, what do I make? What do I want to say at this time? And that's not just part of me as an individual, but also me in relationship to the world and my community and all this change that's happening.
Cool. and then, so I like the dynamic tonight. It's like one person talks and somebody gets a hit and then they talk and it's like, so we're continuously, we've kind of developed that I guess over the dozens of meetings we've had already. It's just, it seems to be natural now. So, oh, I'm going to wait a second.
Thank you.
I will be right back.
Okay, it's just a moment of a gap anyway. That was fun to watch. It was a total shift. That's good. And that's how easy it is in this particular meeting space. It's like everything just happens spontaneously. I like it. So I just, thinking of holding patterns, I was just thinking of what has caused me to start coming out with what I do now in the last months is that I've literally, well, Amir and I have literally been in a holding pattern for over 10 years. We've been in the same place, basically doing the same thing. And it's really it's a very interesting place here because there's not really there's no real resources or anything to connect to in a way to kind of move things in a different direction. It's the middle of the desert and it's a kind of and it's Arizona where the most population of people with developmental disabilities, the most population of elderly people. It's just, in a lot of ways, it's very entropic, just by its nature. And both of us experienced kind of a shifting away from our pasts and all the things, including my spiritual friends and stuff, and all that kind of drifting away and falling away, and just becoming very super ordinary and you know, and just doing a very ordinary mundane life in a very ordinary mundane neighborhood with very ordinary mundane people, the whole thing. And and it's just interesting. I think out of sheer self-defense in my spirit, it was time to start bringing back my my deeper knowing, my connection to my higher self, and start to and thank God that we started getting into vegan activism and met Sailesh Rao and then eventually Jamin, and this whole thing opened up because talk about a period of a holding period. My God, that's like Bodhidharma sitting facing a wall for 9 years, and then he finally he got it out of that. And whew. It's kind of like that on an energy level being here. That's what it's been like. So slowly it's starting to open up. But I see that I've always been, and I'll include Amir in that, always been on the cutting edge of the cutting edge. And people like that always have to kind of go, they're like the first people that the stuff is tested on before it goes on and eventually becomes part of the common experience of the world. Because when all this hits the world, they're not going to know what to do with it. They're not going to know what to do with that entropy because it is going to hit the world. And really, all the old things, when they start breaking down and none of it makes, any sense, or it really doesn't matter anymore, and they start going, why am I doing this? What does it mean? Who cares? That, and what the kind of entropy that leads into too, in a psychological sense, a psychological entropy is like, holy cow, that's intense. I mean, when I was thinking of entropy too today, I was thinking of the first meditation I ever did of Osho meditations, and it was called Mandala. It was an active meditation, all done to music, all of these meditations for the modern man, because it's very hard for the modern man to sit still because he's got too much going on in his head. He can't really stay present and be silent. But by the end of the meditation, the last 15 minutes, you're just laying there. That there are 4 stages of 15 minutes, all very active. The last stage is total stillness. And I was hoping for some kind of real cool, because I had done yoga and stuff, and every time you go in to find a relaxation, it's so blissful, it's so enjoyable. But this time when I went into the final stage, I experienced this entropy that was not comfortable. It was like an entropy that was empty entropy, not a entropy that was like pregnant with some possibility like a vacuum. It was an entropy of just a dead entropy. It was just nothing. And I went, holy cow. And I got this hit immediately. Nobody told me. I just said, oh my God, this is what ego is. This is what ego feels like. This is what the mind does. It literally sucks you dry until there's nothing left, and you're just this dead appearance, and that was the end stage. And I went, wow, I didn't expect the meditation to expose my shadow. I thought it would give me bliss or something like it. Meditations are supposed to do. No. In fact, all of meditation, when you actually get to the point where you can sit and be silent, it's all about being still and hanging in entropy, because every time you do that and come out of it, you feel refreshed again. You feel fresh and full of life again. And you can see the beauty in things again. That's what's so beautiful about meditation. It's literally conscious entropy. You go, yes, please, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm also thinking about how the universe really doesn't like vacuums. It'll fill it up. So entropy is kind of an interesting state, because if you're empty, it will fill. And that's where the freshness comes, I think. So, yeah.
Yes, exactly. That's what I was hoping for, that we shift now into kind of a more mature expression of this meeting, and we start to, like what you just did, you start to, tentatively, because we don't know anything for sure, and we kind of want to go about this like children discovering new things, because that playfulness, that inner playfulness, is how you learn the best. So yeah, I kind of agree with you, Melissa. I think that is where I also came to that conclusion earlier, that out of that freshness comes from that place. And that's kind of where I came from. But that's kind of how I want to move more into a kind of conscious dialoguing now, because once we understand the shadow and the genius and the higher self work, then we can kind of just become more fluid and allow those to just be natural expressions of our personality in these dialogues. And we can just kind of offer, and everybody kind of understands and just kind of shifts and relates to whether it's, a shadow or a genius state of where we're all getting inspiration, or if we just get all overwhelmed in awe because somebody's opening the higher, expressing their higher self. So that's, that's kind of, to me, it's just like it's time to, that's why I said kick it up a notch at the beginning of this meeting, because I want to shift from taking the courage in the beginning to jump into being just raw and sincere, and just starting to open up again to all the places we've been closed down to, not just the dark places, but also the super light places. But now that I feel like we've kind of gone through that grade school, and we're kind of shifting into more of a higher school of stuff now, where we can just conscious dialogue and go together and use one of these life codes each week for a theme, and just kind of jump into it and explore it, and start to pull things out of it. Because you know how it goes when we do these meetings, we pull that stuff out eventually, and it's going to show up in our life in the next week, and neat little mini miracles and unexpected occurrences and things will happen as they have ever since we started. It just seems so curious to me that since we started all this about 4 months ago, how everything hasn't it gone literally like straight up? It was a curve like this, and then it kind of shifted, and now all of a sudden it's like, I mean, and yeah, I mean, it's just so funny how the timing of it, I mean, you just can't mistake that timing. It all happened right in that moment where this crazy guy with the mullet and this long-haired hippie bumped into each other at a pizza place in Mesa, Arizona, in the middle of nowhere. and something just started happening, and it's been happening ever since. Anyway, I got to mention that every now and again because I just find that the timing of it is just amazing.
All the players are turning up and all the pieces are falling into place, even as everything falls apart. it's the yin and yang, you know, death
Yeah.
and birth, growth and decay, all
Mhm.
happening at the same time.
Mhm.
Well, I don't want to spoil this moment, but my mom just invited me to go to dinner with her, so I think I'm gonna take her up on that invitation. But I really enjoyed this conversation. This was just what this is just what I needed, because last night I was just like up late, kind of doing some star reading on some astrology work, just seeing what happened, kind of just a review of what happened the last couple months, and then looking towards today to see what I would get out of today. And I felt like today, the kind of like what I was looking at was that today was going to be about planting seeds and developing like my receptivity and my connection to the inner guidance. And I felt really called to just do everything I did today. I don't know. And then in the conversation, I feel like I was able to open myself up to your guys and your perspectives. And I just really appreciate everything that you have both offered me today and offered us.
Evan, before you leave, I would like to offer you the honored space of closing the meeting tonight, because if we go down below 3, then the meeting's done. So could you close this, you know what I mean? Could you bring the meeting to a close this evening? Just say something, that to synthesize, but also to kind of grace and, this experience we've shared tonight. So you're going to close it. Go ahead.
Okay. I will do my best. I feel that at this time in our lives and in our evolution, that we're experiencing a massive breakdown. People are breaking down, cultures are breaking down, paradigms are breaking down. And I see this in my life, and I feel like what I'm seeing is we're also experiencing lots of breakthroughs. Like Melissa had said, there's this yin and this yang. And what's curious about the group that has come together is it feels like a lot of people who have fallen away from these old ways of being or ways of knowing. And it's almost like, I don't mean this to sound like derogatory, but I feel like it's like the rubble or this dead matter that's coming together. And I feel like I'm at the forest floor, and I'm part of this new fertilization process, because everyone I'm meeting through collective intelligence, and what I feel most drawn to are these broken branches and just people who they're just waiting to become part of the next forest. Yeah, and so I'm looking forward to see what grows out of this.